everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have the most common mistypes for the ISFJ personality type. So the number one mistype for this personality is INFJ. A lot of ISFJs begin their journey thinking they are INFJs, like a lot of them. So if someone tells you they get INFJ on 16 personalities or another website, or if they don't know about the cognitive functions, you might want to double check if they could possibly be ISFJ. I'm not saying to doubt the types of the people around you, but I'm saying it's good to know about the most common mistypes because it'll be helpful in some scenarios that you come across. And so yeah, we're here to unpack a few of the most common mistypes for the ISFJ personality. And so Rob, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Thank you, Joyce, and it's good to be back to this show. I'm Rob. I'm an ISFJ 7-wing 6 SOSX from San Francisco, California. And I hope to break some myths. In other words, I am a myth buster for the ISFJ, and I hope to share that with the audience today.
Yay. And Jordan?
I'm Jordan Wiles, and I type as an ISFJ in Myers-Briggs and a 1-wing 2 in Enneagram. I'm a stay-at-home homeschool mom of 5, and we live in the greater Nashville area.
Nice to know. And Roger?
Hello, everyone. I'm Roger. ISFJ Enneagram 9. I'm also from California. I'm in the LA area, but happy to be here.
Cool. And Jami?
Yes, I guess it's my turn. So, ISFJ, I'm here. I'm in the Midwest. I don't know what else is relevant. Seems pretty fun.
Awesome stuff. And hi, my name's Joyce. I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, and I type people. So common mistypes for the ISFJ personality. I was wondering, ISFJs, what types have you mistyped as in the past, and why? Yep, Rob?
Yeah, I was mistyped as an INFJ for about 20 years. And, I in terms of my research, I find that I do believe I'm an ISFJ because I've had to dig deeper as to what that means in terms of being introverted sensing and break some of those myths. And in terms of sometimes sensors, some people don't like that term. It's seen as a negative term, but really we're more about the concrete, the realities of our past, about understanding history, and about using that to help others in their journey. So I think for me, I've had to learn to understand what is an ISFJ over the last year or two, and realize that yes, that truly is who I am.
Rob started off his type journey in a place that a lot of ISFJs started, as an INFJ. Typically, ISFJs figure out they are an ISFJ in a myriad of ways. Sometimes it's through the cognitive functions. Sometimes it's through temperament theory. So sometimes they figure out, oh, I don't relate as much to the NF temperament. I actually relate more to the SJ temperament. Or it could be another factor. Linda Behrens has interaction styles. Are you a chart the course personality, or are you a behind the scenes interaction style? And that's one of the ways people figure out they're an ISFJ too.
Yeah, behind the scenes. In fact, that carried out throughout my career, even though I've worked at high-level executive and political positions. I've always enjoyed the behind the scenes more. In fact, that's what I'm doing now in my semi-retired life.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share their story?
I just throughout high school, taking online quizzes and things like that, always typed as an INFJ, but without really understanding the depths of that, I resonated with it on the surface. So it wasn't until probably 2010 maybe that I started getting really interested in psychology and things like that. Didn't retest until I would say right before I enrolled in Personality Hackers profiler training. And so going down that rabbit hole of ISFJ and the cognitive functions, everything really stood out to me in a different way. And Enneagram shortly after that kind of confirmed those different more traditionalists as Kiersey's temperaments. I always resonated with the traditionalist. So that was my experience. And I have mistyped as an ISFP only because, in the psych community, we have the term, those who fire together, wire together. And that was very true for me and my husband as an ISFP and as a 6. So I have 6 in my tri-type as well. So I can see the morph. And I think ISFJs tend to be very adaptable anyways, and tend to morph with the people that they're around the most. Very, very easily mirror other types. I had somebody in the profiler training for personality hacker type me as an ISTJ, which was very interesting because I have an ISTJ daughter. And while we do share a lot of similarities, we have a lot of very different qualities as well. But yeah, so I can see myself in pretty much every type to some degree. ISFJ just tends to be much more to my core.
Jordan brings up a good point. So sometimes you look like the types that you're around. So Jordan is married to an ISFP, so she looks a little bit more like an ISFP. She has people she's related to who are ISTJs, and that causes her to look a little more like an ISTJ. Your environment impacts how people type you too. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing she mentioned that was really great was ISFJs are known as one of the most adaptable types. So I find with my ISFJ friends, they actually change sometimes to be like the people they hang around with. There's this ISFJ friend I have that if you have a hobby, she might try to adopt that hobby to kind of like be closer to you. There are a lot of sweet things that ISFJs do like that anyone can do it, right? Anyone is capable of it. But yeah. I notice FE is more likely to mold itself to connect with you.
Yeah. I was going to say is, I've heard the term group thought is we want to make the best for everyone. We're highly skilled in that we can go into a social situation, quickly understand the landscape of that group and adapt ourselves.
Especially if you're stronger on the extroverted feeling side.
Yeah.
I think some ISFJs too who are on the SI, TI side might not have as much relation to that. Roger, what are your thoughts?
The most commonly that I've been mistyped as has been INFJ for sure. And especially even just the simple fact of being interested in personality theory and just being interested in MBTI in general. Everybody starts to assume like I'm more like INFJ or, a sensors can't possibly be thinking this way. There's no way. And so that was a very common mistype for me. Another one was also ISTJ as well, but I'm curious to see if maybe that's possibly to do with cultural, gender kind of situation there. So yeah, those have been the two that I've been mistyped as a lot.
Mm-hmm. In a very broad sweeping way, sometimes males get quickly typed as more thinkery, even when they're a feeler guy, because of the gender stuff. It's a cultural thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jami?
So I've never mistyped or been mistyped as an INFJ. That has not been my story. And I was actually really hard for me to understand until I started talking to people in type, actually. So that was interesting. But for a long time, I guess like a year, I thought I was an INFP. And then I had an INTP come up to me and be like, no, and this is why.
Yeah.
And that helped. And then I got professionally typed ISFJ, and it just stuck. At this point, when people think I'm something different, it's usually ESFJ, but sometimes NFP comes up again. So somewhere in there, I think it's probably just pretty clear I'm a feeler with SINE.
For ISFJs, you might notice they're SINE, but you don't know where it is specifically in the stack. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes people misunderstand the word sensor in the community. And so I was wondering, how would you all describe how it's like to use SI or to have sensing preferences in your life? How would you have explained it to you when you thought you were a different type so you would understand that it sounded like you? How would you explain SI or sensing in a way that makes sense to you when you were first starting out your journey?
For me, I would say it's recalling concrete realities of the past. I have a mind that has a great amount of storage of everything that's happened, people's emotions, people's expressions. And I can dial in very quickly to that and then make connections with that. So when I imagine in my mind, I'm making connections with 1,000 different points in the past and quickly coming to some kind of conclusion, and then using that. So that's what I see a sensor as. So sometimes we have these kind of images in our mind, and that brings on emotions that override the present reality. In other words, I have so much conviction of what's happened in the past that I very quickly drive to a conclusion and use that.
I think a really good way, I think I would have told myself, I guess, to try to figure out if I had SI was to ask what I noticed, like in art. I think that's a good way to see what kind of function somebody has, because what they point out, like, are they talking about what this piece of art means, or are they pointing out little details in it, or is it reminding them of something, or are they learning something? Like, that was a really good method that I started using on other people, I guess, to kind of see what they gained, like what information are they taking in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think for SI or even SE, it takes a little bit more conscious effort to look behind the curtain, so to speak, and to look at the broader expansion of what's going on versus what's on the surface level. For me, I would say that both sensing functions are very different from one another. But as far as the introverted particle of it is that post-processing element that SI has, having to kind of think from back to forward almost, if that makes sense, and taking a lot more time to process what's going on or what happened from a reverse standpoint, if that makes sense.
That makes
Perfect.
sense. And Roger?
I think for me, it's the same as what Rob was saying. Rob definitely said it very beautifully there. Yeah, definitely from concrete reality, being able to kind of recall these kinds of things, making connections with past things. But yeah, I really like the way that Rob said it. I would agree completely with him.
That's fascinating. I wonder if SI DOMs might, in the beginning, not relate to being in the past, because there's sometimes a negative stigma to being said that you're stuck in the past almost. So how would you differentiate that negative stigma from people thinking about the past as being stuck in the past, and what is the reality of it? Like, how would you take away that type of misunderstanding that people typically have between these two things?
Well, SI comes with a strong reservoir of experience, so I don't think you ever escape the past. It's always just right there, for one. I don't know. I think it helps you actually navigate life more rather than it being a negative thing. I mean, we don't have the foresight necessarily to know when unique things are coming upon us, but if we go into the same situation again, we know exactly what to expect. So I think it can actually be really helpful, personally.
Yeah. And as opposed to living in the past or being stuck in the past, more using the past as a reference or a resource to gather information about the current situation.
Okay.
You know, I'd like to associate something else with this. Is we're known as the defender. We want people to be happy. So our intended outcome is that. So I'm looking at it from a positive perspective of how, using that historical information to drive out happiness, using that information to make things work.
Yeah. Roger?
And I think there's something to be said about extremes, right? Because it does. I mean, I've known other ISFJs who definitely get stuck in the past, stay in the past, live in the past, and they kind of start going down an unhealthy path. But that doesn't necessarily apply for everybody else. And we use the past as a reference. I like what Jordan said as well, using the past as a reference to dictate what we do in our future, what we do in our present moment. But yeah, I can understand how people can get stuck in that past, but it doesn't necessarily apply to every single ISFJ out there.
Yeah, as related to that, it just occurred to me is that we are known for extroverted intuition, lower on the stack. And with that is there can be some negative attitude of willing to try new things. And we really have to push those boundaries ourselves. And I'm one that I have to do that over the course of my life. I've really had to push myself to get somewhere. And I think it's something that I've learned. So I had to escape that. And I feel that it's relevant for me, but although it's weak in the stack.
Yeah, that's something I was going to add to any being the aspirational element of our type, depending on how developed it is at different seasons in our life might determine how open we are to trying new things and expanding our opportunities. And so like Roger was saying, some people might be more prone to being stuck in the past and looking at the future in a negative light, unless their NE happens to be more developed or they're actively developing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the core qualities of SI is using the past as a reference point, like Jordan was saying, to make great decisions in the reality that you live in. That's one of the core indicators, like how much do you kind of flip through your experiences, even not completely consciously too. You can also do a quick flipping through of your experiences to inform how you approach the world almost.
I don't even think it's a choice. It just automatically happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah.
What I was saying earlier, I think applies here is that these images from the past, they bring emotions onto us that override the present reality. That information is really pushing us hard to make, to make that solid decision, to be concrete.
It's like when you're looking at something, maybe it's not conscious, but you're also layering on things it reminds you of in the past. So that is interesting.
It's almost like a screen. It's like you're going to a 3D movie and you have to put your glasses back on, but it's like your glasses are always on. And if you're trying to witness reality as it is, it's like ripping them off of your face. That's really hard.
That's so cool.
I think there is something to be said too about your Enneagram position too, and how it relates to past, present, and future. Because, like, for instance, as a 1, I'm typically more in the present. I have a decent ability to plan for the future, but it's literally like a week or a month ahead at best. And almost everything that I do pertaining to the future has some sort of mirroring or replication of something that I've done before. For instance, I mean, this is just a very day-to-day example, but like we eat Mexican on Monday, we eat Chinese on Tuesday, like whatever I'm making for my family throughout the week might be something slightly different thanks to NE, but it's still going to replicate something that I did last week or the week before. So again, that like very in the moment element with bits of the past brought in.
Yeah. So there's this element of SI sometimes recreating things that have worked well in the past and bringing it back. And that's why it has, for some people, been associated with routines and habits, because one of Jordan's routines is Mexican on a certain day.
Yeah.
So when they say that SI users have a tradition, it's not always like society's tradition. If they don't care about the tradition of society, it might just be their own tradition. Like, I like to have Mexican on this day, Italian on that day. That's still a tradition. It's your own tradition, though. That's another component of SI, too. Reaching this homeostasis through a multitude of ways.
It can almost be an aesthetic too, because when I go to the park to read, like I'll have a coffee with me, like I have these little detail things I always have to have when I do certain things. And then it's like, ooh, this feels like fall, or this feels like XYZ. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if that's related to our extroverted feeling, because we do value interpersonal harmony, that we value social norms, and we'll care for others, using that. So I think for me, that's what I feel.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree. And then maybe a little bit of SI's subjective experience tied into that.
Yeah. Jami, when you talk about a certain drink you have to do a certain activity, I wonder if ISFJs are the ones who drink pumpkin spice lattes when it's pumpkin spice.
Yes, I was so excited when pumpkin spice season hit.
And the peppermint mochas in December.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. A time of year necessitates certain foods.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so true.
That's wonderful.
It mirrors nature too, which is interesting. Like it kind of follows a pattern in a sense.
Yeah. SI can be compared to a circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythms, they have a certain type of flow to them, like a specific certain flow all the time. And it's the same as that kind of SI. It's trying to get to this circadian rhythm medium almost. Finding your homeostasis, finding that perfect rhyme. And so I was wondering, with the INFJ mistype, what are some ways that would have helped you figure out you were an ISFJ if you thought you were an INFJ? So what are some differentiating factors?
Yeah, I think the INFJ is misunderstood. And you have to understand that they sometimes in the moment, they're subconscious, they're sometimes disassociated from what I read. And that's very different than the way I am. I'm very concrete. I'm very focused. I like to do one thing at a time. I'm very methodical about that. I get very distracted if there's more than, I might have a list of 20 things I need to do, which I keep in a notebook, which is also a common trait of ISFJs. Keeping a diary or keeping reflective writing, that kind of stuff. So in looking through the INFJ, just that sense of being disassociated, that unconscious awareness is very different than me. So I think that's what helped me understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. INFJs are really detached from reality. As an INFJ myself, I see reality as an option. And I'm sure other dominant intuitive types feel the exact same way. It's like, oh, reality is an option. But ideas and truly understanding the main theme and the main point of an idea feels more real to me than reality itself, by and large. Whereas for SI, you know that reality is a thing, or you feel pretty grounded that reality is in front of you.
My guess, too, is that INFJs are probably way more detached from their body as a whole, whereas ISFJs can feel their body all the time.
Yeah.
True. My body feels like a vessel to communicate universal thoughts about the human condition, but it really feels negotiable. The body feels like it's not a real thing as an INFJ. It feels like this is just a inconvenience to me thinking about the world in a deeper way.
You're just a soul, Joyce.
That feels so accurate.
Yeah, I think that SI tends to focus more on impressions of reality and how something makes sense to the individual, versus the NI user is more about implications of reality and what things could turn into. I don't know if that makes sense. Kind of subjective experience versus subjective realities.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Which one is which again, Jordan?
I would say SI is more about subjective experience, how each experience resonates with the person, and then subjective realities, like you said, everything's an option. I can choose my reality, whereas that's really hard for me to wrap my mind around.
Yeah.
Because, well, and like I said, it's very easy for me to try to find impressions of things and meanings to things, like something that happened in my day and what does that make me feel? What do I think about that thing? But then it is what it is. Still, I don't really get to change how I feel about it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, that makes complete sense.
SI versus NI as a whole is very interesting, because I think the SI details and the impressions and experiences we have seems to be almost irrelevant to NI. Because NI is looking at it more thematically. Like, I feel like you're more likely to say, like, the plot is XYZ. And SI is more like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Like, we have a much harder time getting a through line for what our life means. It's more like we have individual moments. NI is way better about backing up and being like, this is everything as a whole.
Yeah, as an INFJ myself, I agree with that. It's almost like you see everything through a theme, a broad stroke generalization. Your brain is like a sweeping generalization of everything. You archetypicalize everything. And basically the details don't matter unless they enhance the theme in some way. It's almost like your brain rejects internalizing details unless it helps you understand the theme more deeply. And you only remember the detail just because it adds on to the theme. And the moment it doesn't relate to the theme anymore, you discard it. Your brain literally rejects it, like water insoluble items. It's like when water tries to go in waterproof items. That's literally how details feel like to an INFJ's brain.
What's funny too, like, I'm not sure if the other ISFJs will feel this way or not, but whenever I see someone and it's been a little while, I'll be like, oh, what are you up to? How was your day? Like, yada yada. And to ask an NJ that, they're like, my day? Like, like, what did you eat today? Why is that relevant? It just is. I want to know what you did today. Like, that's interesting information to me.
Yeah.
I love to ask get to know you type questions that would be considered small talk, I guess. Where I think intuitives tend to want to know much deeper things and maybe way too soon. ISFJs, I think, can be a little bit more private about their personal feelings and things. One, because it's really hard to conjure them up unless we've thought a lot about a topic. So like more of those on the surface questions, ISFJs tend to be much more comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed. We're coming into the group adjusting to the social setting at hand. So whatever the social setting is, whatever the age group we're working with, we quickly try to understand that group and what's of interest to them.
That's the difference between the two axes too. So NISE and INFJs, they only care about what's relevant. And so if it's relevant to a main thing, they'll want to know. But if it's even irrelevant to a main schema within your mind, your brain doesn't want to take it in. It's closed.
Yeah.
Whereas you'll notice in an ISFJ, when they're telling stories, they'll do what Jami said. They'll tell you actually like the sequence of the things that happen sometimes, whereas an INFJ will go like, why does that matter? I'm just going to tell you the exact thing that you need to know from it. Like that's probably the most important part that you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because ISFJs use the SI-NE axis, and SI will store the little details that left an impression on you. And so you'll hear it as they recall stories too. Any other points before we move on to the next type?
I think, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but I see INFJ is excited by the unknown. Whereas we prefer to work in the ISFJ world with the reality, with known.
Oh.
So maybe that's part of that disconnected thing we talked about.
The unknown is scary, I think.
Yeah.
That's scary. I mean, when people ask you too, like, what do you want for yourself within 5 years? I'm like, I have no idea. Or like, where do you see yourself? Like trying to long range plan that way, I don't know. That's really hard.
I've started so many dream boards that just sat there on the wall for forever with no goals or no optimism at all.
Yeah. I've been trying to write that book for the last 5 years.
Really great point. And when you do find an ISFJ that does plan pretty long term, you'll notice this difference. It's typically within the scope of their own lives. So sometimes it'll be more about what's relevant to their life and the long-term plan of their life. Whereas with NI DOMs, you'll see them when NI DOMs are long-range planning, it's actually regarding the broader scope of society, the broader scope of life itself, the broader scope of humanity as we know it. It's never about just their life. And so that's another differentiator. Even if an ISFJ plans, they might be planning within the scope of me and my life. So that's another way to kind of tell.
I was going to note as well that NJs in general seem much more, well, I think especially NFJs, like very into manifestation. And the thing with manifestation is you have to believe that things will come together for you even if you can't see it. So if I say, like, I want a PhD in XYZ, but you don't have the money for it, there's no college nearby, whatever, and you're an ISFJ, it's like, well, this isn't possible. Like, how is that even going to work out? I feel like when you have NI, you can kind of, it's almost like that dissociative effect, but it's in a positive way because you're like, this could happen somehow, because I see myself going there. Like, I have a very hard time with that. So I do appreciate that with NI, where it's like anything could be possible if it's your right path. I don't necessarily believe it. Like, I want to, but it's hard for me to see the path if it's not there already.
Yeah. So NI in INFJs is focused on what will be, even if right now the circumstance shows that
it's not
reality
possible.
is dim.
Yeah, like that's powerful to me for someone to be able to believe it when they can't like see it logically in place in reality. I'm like, how is that even possible? It's so cool, but
Yeah, and that's how you know someone relies on the past as a reference. You know, based on the past, that pursuing that might be a foolish dream, or it might be actually like poorly thought out. But you only know that because you have something to anchor it in your mind. Whereas with the INFJ, they don't take that same type of caution that ISFJs take from their past experiences, because they don't necessarily see much reference value in it. I don't know how to explain it. Okay, this is poorly explained.
No, I think you explained it well. And I think that, at least from what I've heard from NFJs, they tend to think the past is somewhat irrelevant because it's done, it's over. There is an element to history repeating itself, but if that's not happening right now, then that's not applicable. So I've talked to a lot of NFJs that aren't into journal keeping or record keeping and things like that, because what's the point of going back and reading it? It's done. So yeah, I agree with that.
The past is irrelevant for a lot of NFJ types because they're more about the vision of what will be or how the world could be or the potential of reality rather than actual reality itself. That an ISFJ would go like, this is the reality, actually, INFJ. Cool.
I was just thinking too that ISFJs are probably better at making the most of whatever situation they're in, and INFJs are probably better at not being stuck in their situation, like thinking that's the end kind of thing. There's more other places to go.
Yeah. An INFJ will be future casting, future pacing. Yeah. That makes sense. Cool.
Another note about what we were saying earlier about an ISFJ versus an INFJ relaying information or stories. I think something, because we shared that TI commonality, we want to give as much information as we think is necessary to the listener, but NI will ebb and flow throughout the middle, the end, the beginning, and all the way around, where an SI user might be a little bit more synchronous and chronological about it. So it's just an added.
Yeah.
We force people to listen to the whole story.
We have a saying in our home because my husband is an ISFP and I had an ISTJ grandfather who was married to an ESFJ for a long time, and she was the same. She wanted to give you every detail possible because everything was relevant. And he would sit there at the table and he'd be like, I just want to know where the plate came from, because I don't want to know about who had the plate 100 years ago and where it passed down to what. So every now and then when I kind of get on a tangent, my husband will say, honey, I just want to know where the plate came from.
But if you remember the details, it just feels significant. It's like, I want to talk you through this because this is all relevant to me. But if they just want the main point, yeah.
And you'll notice with ISFJs or SI users in general is that because they see so much value in their experiences, the next best thing is someone else's experiences. So they might be asking, how did you experience that? Can you tell me about your experiences regarding that? Someone who asks that a lot is very likely an SI user. If you hear them going like, let's say you're going to a new gym and you have someone going like, how was that gym like? Can you tell me what that gym was like? It's either possibly a sensing preference or an SI preference, because you want to know something about concrete reality from another person. So,
and it very well could be the difference between FE and TE, depending on what the criteria is for what you're asking, is like, did you like that gym versus what were some things about that gym, like the money, the cost, the equipment, some of the more technical elements of it versus that person's experience and their enjoyment of it.
Yeah. So these are clues. Of course, these are behaviors, and so type is your cognition. And so I don't mean to generalize. These are just like little things you can look for. And if someone shows enough of these, it might be like you might want to check into some certain types, but type is about your why, your cognitive reasoning. So that is the most important for determining your type, because it's your cognitive process. That's what type is. And so the next type I'd like to go over with all you ISFJs is, how would you tell apart an ISFJ from an ISTJ? If there was an ISFJ wondering if they're an ISTJ, what would you go through as a differentiator?
They usually seem more blunt than I am. I guess there's like less, like they don't feel like they have to sugarcoat, I guess. Not that I mean to myself, but it just automatically comes off nicer than even what's in my head. And sometimes ISTJs will say things and I'll be shocked.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Love y'all. I'm just saying, if we're trying to differentiate.
Yeah, bluntness. Here's an example for audience comprehension. So my dad's an ISTJ, and he said this to me. He's like, Joyce, never show me your YouTube channel because I have a feeling I'll react poorly to it because I don't think it's good. I probably won't think it's good. So just don't show it to me. And I'm like, thanks, Dad.
Dad!
That was him being nice. So he thought he was being nice. That was his nice mode. Because he was like, oh, you know what? Instead of reacting and actually watching it and then being disappointed, I'm just going to tell her beforehand that I think it's disappointing. And I'm like, Dad, that's what you find nice? Like, okay. So that's an example of extroverted thinking bluntness. The TE hammer, the TE sledgehammer, the TE drill sergeant. Not everyone is this bad, but I feel like this is indicative of a TE-FE difference, because no one on this panel has ever said anything that could possibly ever trigger me ever. And my dad was on a nice day trying to be nice to me, and that was not even nice. So
Yeah.
Well, it's like TE is trying to be effective. And so in a sense, like, you're right. Your dad was trying to be nice to you. Like, I don't want to ultimately hurt you. So I'm going to flat out tell you right now, I'm not going to watch it because I know you'll get your feelings hurt if I tell you my honest opinion, you know? Like, that was him trying to navigate it, which is interesting because that's not how Effie would be like, you're doing so good, Joyce, whether or not they actually felt that way. Because that's like the social okay thing to do, is to compliment someone on something they're trying to do.
Exactly. So you'll notice TE is more straightforward with its critiquing of effectiveness, whereas FE will try to soften the blow a little more.
Mm-hmm.
But
True.
this might be moderated for female and male. So sometimes females in general might be a little more softening their words, even if they are a TE user, or just cultural. It might cause some weirdness here too, and that might not be like a differentiator that works in there, but it's one of the differentiators.
I could see that, but I also think about like Angela from The Office, who I would guess is an ISTJ, and
Most
she's
definitely.
like very blunt.
Yeah.
Her versus Pam, and I'm like, yeah, there's definitely a difference there, you know. Sorry, I have to reference The Office just because it's the best show on earth.
Yeah.
I would say too, the difference between ISTJs and ISFJs is which one is more comfortable managing or directing people versus managing objects or technicalities, numbers, and those types of things. I think that ISFJs are naturally better at mitigating drama or conflict and things like that, kind of, if you're using like an office type setting or something like that. Handling people's emotions more delicately, maybe, versus an ISTJ you can always count on to have a working spreadsheet system that's very good, operating well-oiled, to do with facts and figures and objects and things.
Yeah, TE, extroverted thinking, is a little more systematized. This might show in how anal they are about certain items in their house being in a specific place. So
Yeah.
Here's another example for audience comprehension. With my ISTJ dad, he actually gets upset and he goes into hissy fit mode when you put certain objects in places they're not supposed to go in. And I'm like, maybe I would guess an ISTJ is even more bothered by it than an ISFJ would be. So, because they have TE too. So it's like TE likes logistical order around it. And it's like, hey, Joyce, I can't believe you put the sriracha there and not there. Goddamn.
Oh,
ISTJs might react a little more when the objects are misplaced. Like even in the fridge, there can be like an angry hissy fit, like why is that object where I can't find it in the fridge? Whereas maybe like an ISFJ with FE might handle it a little more tactfully and go like, hey guys, do you know where you left that object in the fridge? You know, I can't find it. So it has more of an FE bent to it. This goes back to the introverted feeling, the FI of the ISTJ. So sometimes like when FI is triggered, it can sometimes show a very strong like or dislike reaction to something. Whereas like with FE, you might tone down your strong likes and dislikes because you want to keep harmony around you in some way. So it's like, yeah, I might not like or dislike this, but I'm going to show a more socially appropriate reaction around me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I agree in my experience. Like, it'll bother me if something isn't where I want it to be, but it's like, you know, what matters more right now? Like, I can literally put this object where I want it now. I'm not going to impose order on somebody else. Like, I don't like doing that. You know, that feels gross to me. So maybe I'll say something kind of like warm about it, like, oh, well, this is where I like it, you know? So try to go about it that way, but not dictatory. That doesn't feel good.
And that might be determined by the person's individual stress levels too, because I think once it's hard for ISFJs to get across like their personal boundaries and things like that, where I think ISTJs carry personal boundaries really close and exact them very well. They're a little bit more assertive about things like that. So when I think both types, because of that SI need for sameness and repetition and maybe even a bit of ritualism, we can both be a little bit like that. But I think because FE users have a little bit more of a struggle asserting themselves, we might be a lot nicer about it the first 10 or 15 times. Even 20 times.
Called out.
Until it hits that threshold.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic point. Personal boundaries, extroverted feeling, and having a poor sense of personal boundaries, or it's like a harder time because you want to be kind to the other person's feelings too, and you're considering how the other person might feel. And so it makes it harder to set hard boundaries because you're like, I'm going to soften it because I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Whereas an ISTJ will find it easier to set personal boundaries in a more exact way. That's a good differentiation, Jordan.
Boundaries are really hard for me too. Like, now you brought that up, that hit me like, oh God, because I get exhausted trying to assert that like what I desire in a dynamic matters, you know? So then if someone keeps basically telling me no, like it doesn't matter, then it's like, all right, well, I can't count on you. And I'm just going to expect this poor treatment. And that sucks.
Yeah, it's definitely been a process for me as well. Just even understanding boundaries in a positive light. You know, that it's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true too. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just feel that situations like those can just be handled in a way more collaborative manner rather than just telling the other person what to do. It's like, well, let's work this out. You know, let's try to figure out a solution together, or let's see what's maybe even like a better place for this object if needed. But yeah, collaboration triumphs for sure. Just telling other people what to do or how I want things to be.
Yeah, that's a good differentiator between FE and TE. FE is more likely to want to solve a scenario through collaboration, whereas TE, sometimes their more natural impulse is commanding. Like, don't put it there. Like, they won't even kind of consult you sometimes. It'll be like, don't do that. And it's like, what about my input, my feelings?
Yeah. And I think it gets to one of the weaknesses I see in ISTJ, and that is not giving enough praise or affirmation, because we're looking for affirmation.
Yeah. Jami's good at affirming. You all are good at affirming.
So are you, Joyce.
Yeah, you just did. Huh. Well, I think if there's good to be said about someone, it should be said. Like, that's generally how I operate, you know? Because how often, you know, are people getting complimented on what they're doing well? It's usually like people jump to criticism, it feels like, and I don't.
Yeah.
That sucks to me.
Yeah. So you'll notice this difference between ISFJs and ISTJs as well. The ISFJ will do things in the name of connection. So we mentioned a lot of things that, you know, ISFJs do, like what Jami just mentioned. That's in the name of connection because it fosters connection. You know, when you tell someone good things about them, it fosters the bond that you have between each other. But with ISTJs, ISTJs tend to focus on staying true to themselves. So with introverted feeling in the ISTJ, they're going to go like, am I staying true to myself? And they're more likely to be abrasive when they're not able to stay true to themselves and set hard boundaries and kind of go like, nah, I'm not going to participate in this because it doesn't help me stay true to myself in my FI way. So that's another differentiator too.
Communication, I think, is another one. And that might just be me. I'm a Gemini. So communication's a huge thing for me. And I think that a lot of times for FE users, that connectivity you were talking about, Joyce, is only bred through good communication. And maybe there's a bit of TI in there as well, because like I said before, we find every bit of information relevant, especially when it has to do with another person's preference or their experience. It's applicable to that communication process. And I think because of FI, ISTJs can see a little bit less give and take when it comes to communication. It's very like hard and fast, like this is what I think, this is what I want, this is how we should do this thing. And there's not really a lot of feedback flow, if that makes sense. So their communication style is very assertive, very direct, and very goal-oriented.
Yeah. Yeah, they can tolerate conflict situations without emotional upheaval, and then they can also dole out punishment or criticism when called for. They don't hesitate on that.
Yeah. One way to tell if someone has a TE or an FE preference is how they edit your essay. So.
That's awesome.
I think I've had a few of those professors.
I've had ISFJs edit my essays. They'll kind of go like, oh, Joyce, you could do this. So it's more of a suggestion. And so sometimes they'll use the editing feature more. They'll go like, they'll write it, but give me the choice to accept or reject it and go like, what are your thoughts? It's more that feedback that Jordan was mentioning. They're going to want your feedback before making calls for you. So they're like, Joyce, what would make you the happiest? Because FE wants to know what would make the other person the happiest, they need your feedback to know if it'll make you happy. So that even carries on to little things. Like they'll be more receptive to seeing if it makes you smile or cry. Whereas I have an ISTJ who edits my essays sometimes, and she'll go like, wrong. All right, I'm like, she won't even ask me, and she'll upheaval the whole thing and go like, this is horrible. A second grader would have written this.
Oh no!
I'm like, oh dang. Oh, but the reason why she says that is actually because she respects me enough to say that. She's like, I think that you can take it, and I also think that you can improve. So it's like a nice thing for her to do, but she's so upfront with it, and it's funny. So there was an immediate difference between FJs and TJs just casually looking at my work.
It speaks to a growth point for ISFJs to want to learn to be a little bit more assertive and maybe a little bit less coddly, for lack of a better term, because I think that we are so afraid sometimes of hurting people's feelings that we're not completely genuine with our feedback. We're only kind of saying what we hope the other person wants to hear, that's what they want to hear. So learning to grow beyond that, to be more honest, for lack of a better term.
FE placation is a real thing.
Yes.
And Rob?
Yeah, I was thinking I've been told that in my past as well, but distant past, and I think I've improved in that area.
Yeah. So you can always get better at the areas in which you naturally do things. There's always that natural inclination, but you can always, like, the sky's the limit. You can always figure out a way to learn how to do the preference that is a little less natural. But it's still possible because we can do all 8 functions. We can do it, like, literally there's no cap on your abilities. There's just type is about where you start. It's not where you end. So you might have a natural preference towards something, but it doesn't mean that it's always like that's not the cap of your ability. That's just the beginning of your ability, and then you can expand in a multitude of different ways from that. So type is never meant to limit you. If you ever feel like type is limiting you, you're using it in the wrong way. So type is used to expand our awareness, to help us become more introspective, or promote a process of self-discovery, or improve communication, or to better your life in some way. So yeah, just a reminder to people to use type responsibly. Cool beans, cool beans. So the next type we will be contrasting the ISFJ with is... What should we go for next?
Let's do INFP, because that was my problem.
All right. INFP. Let's try to differentiate ISFJ from INFP in a more broader sense too. How do you figure out SI in the first slot versus SI in the third slot? So how do you separate the ISJs from the INXPs? How do you separate the ISFJ and ISTJ from the INFP and INTP? Because they have SI and NE in a different order.
Jami, what is it that made you originally resonate with INFP?
I think it was like the profile itself of what it said an INFP was, which was like this soft, introspective, contemplative person, I think in general. And I think that could apply to a lot of different people, not just an INFP. But as far as what differentiates SI Dom from SI Tertiary, I think it goes back to what we were saying before of how close is your past to you. Like, I resonate with it being with me all the time to the extent I can't escape it. I don't see INFPs utilizing SI in the way that I do, or having as much body awareness as I do, or I don't know, putting anything above their inherent personal values. You know, like that seems to be the most important thing. And to me, I have to spend a lot of time actually figuring out what I value that other people don't entice me to value. You know, like that kind of FE awareness, or the SI sort of collective shoulds. Like, I'm not always sure who I would be if I just removed myself from everyone else.
One of my daughters is an INFP, and I think it's their emotional needs come first. Their integrity rules. They do try to mirror the other people's emotions. So it's been definitely a journey for my INFP.
One of the differentiators between these two types too is FI DOMs are more likely to notice when people mischaracterize their identity, whereas maybe an FE auxiliary might go like, you know what, not all battles are worth fighting, and being more accommodating and more placating. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care if someone mischaracterizes my identity. For an FI DOM, identity is paramount, and so they spend a lot of time in that realm of thinking about, who am I, who is this, who I am. So they know when you're getting it off, and so they're more likely to speak up or notice it. This differentiation gets more complicated when the FI DOM is a type 9 FI DOM. They might not know what they feel, and so they might seem FE placatey too. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yes.
I was talking to a couple INFPs actually on Twitter, who I'm pretty dang sure they're actually INFPs. And one of the things that bothers me is like having dishes in the sink at all. Like, there are some things where I'm like, this sensory thing has to be done, otherwise like I can't think. And that's one of them. And these INFPs were like, well, I don't even notice dishes in the sink. I'm like, how? Like, you have the smell and you know that these things need to get done and you're not doing them. Like, I can't divorce myself from that. And then emails are another thing where like I have to have 0 like unread. and they can go for like 5,000 unread emails. It's like these little things that need to get taken care of that they don't care about. So that confused me for a while when I thought I was INFP. Like, why do I care so much about the stuff that so many other people don't? I don't understand.
Well said, Jami. And that's one of the key differentiators too between ISFJ and an NE auxiliary is how connected to reality are you? With my INFP friends, they get reality things wrong all the time. So they'll think that, oh, you know what, I can just do this. And then it's like, you really can't just do that, INFP. I don't know how to explain it. INFPs are really detached from reality as a thing. They're in like daydreaming mode, and that means that common sense things they will miss very easily. So here's an example for audience comprehension. I just have so many people asking for examples, so I'm trying to give more examples. An INFP not knowing that you have to do certain things to get certain movie tickets to go to the movies. So it's almost like they'll set up, oh, you know what? Let's do this, and then they'll do it, and they'll realize all the sensory things that were missing to make that happen. And while the ISFJ might notice those things beforehand, before those happen, because it's like, how do you not know that when you go to a movie, everyone does this beforehand? Whereas the INFP will miss out on those specific small sensory things that actually help you get a thing done. So that's a difference I notice very, very, very often. Like ISFJs do not make those mistakes as often as INFPs do. They're more likely the one to call out that is not going to happen if that doesn't happen.
Yes.
I think, yeah, SJs in general, I would say, once they have gone through a process of something, know that this takes these steps to finish to completion or whatever. Like they can apply it in other situations, you know. Like my sister, I think she's actually an ESFJ, but she was applying to colleges and she didn't realize she had to write an essay for colleges. She didn't realize she had to do like several things. And I'm like, what? You have a lot you need to do. Even though she's ESFJ, she'd never done it before. So she had no clue. And I was like, okay, I'm going to walk you through this because I've done this several times, you know? And I would expect something like that to be more, what seems obvious, I guess, in a sensory way, to be not as obvious to somebody who wasn't focused in that area, I guess.
Yeah. It's almost like for INFPs, sometimes their SI malfunctions. So they're good at going to the past, but their sophistication of going to the past is not the same as an ISFJ. So they're going to leave out steps even if they have done it before. It's almost like they're several feet apart from reality. That's why INFPs are known for having this really strong ideal, and then those ideals always crashing. So an INFP will build something up to be what it's not, and then it'll crash, and then they'll do it right again, and then it'll crash, because they don't have a good SI sense of what is realistic in reality. So they're constantly in this dream fantasy world, rose-colored glass in their head. Whereas an ISFJ may be more grounded in reality enough to catch the common pitfalls that INFPs tend to fall into.
I think we almost have the opposite problem. Like my dad will tell me all the time, you need to think outside of the box, or this is not the only way you can do this. And I'm like, I can't see any other way. You know, like I'm used to doing things this way, or this is the only thing that makes sense to me. That lower intuition, I guess. It could be frustrating though, because it's like, well, I literally can't conceive of something I've never done before, so help. The other thought I had about if you're somewhere between like an FI user and a TI user is you can kind of see, I don't know, like I question why people believe what they believe rather than just blindly honoring what they believe, I guess. Like I want to know how they got to their personal structures or something. I don't know. Cool. But when I question though FI users, like, so you believe this, but that doesn't make sense logically, they'll get upset. So I try not to do that, but I also am like, I want to know how you're bending around logic in this way, you know, but from a belief point, not to be offensive, just to know how it works.
Mhm.
I've had a couple of conversations with flat earthers, and I'm intrigued by their reasoning and their logic. And one particular FI user in one situation couldn't really give me any reference points or websites to look at or information to pull up. It was a very serious, I'm not going to argue this subject. I was like, okay, that's fine. I wasn't wanting to argue. I was just curious.
Right. I think we can be really curious, honestly, like ISFJs in general, like wanting to know how people get to their theories or thoughts or what their experiences are. But if something doesn't make sense, it just doesn't make sense. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. With some FI DOMs, they have a really strong conviction. And so to attack it sometimes is like they really hold on to their convictions really strongly. Some of them, not all. Some of them are really chill too, especially if they're type 9. But I notice with FI, it's more quickly to go like, you're wrong. And to say things that are actually like very like, because they're going to use their TE hammer while they communicate their points. Whereas with, I guess, an ISFJ, they're more looking at it from a TI lens, like how can I logically pick this apart in a slightly detached way? It's like I'm going to figure out what a flat earther is thinking in a detached way and kind of get to the truth of it. So there's that.
Yeah,
yeah, the detachment makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think FITE, that polarity can be extremists, and they think in very clear right, wrong, black, white. And any SI, especially if you have the TI thrown in there, can be very moldable and expansive and weave in and out of all of the possible scenarios or the reasons why.
Yeah. FITE is more likely to have a really strong good or bad stance with something and be kind of like, no, this is definitive. This is like extreme. Not all of them, but when they do, they do. Roger, do you have any thoughts before we move on to the next differentiator? Okay, gotcha. The next types that we will be differentiating between is the ISFJ and the ESFJ. How would you be able to tell apart an ISFJ from their extroverted counterpart?
ESFJs typically have more energy, it seems like, than ISFJs. Like their willingness to be around people for more expansive periods of times. They seem to host more. Like they actually want to put on group events, and I'm like, I don't have the energy for that. I had something else and I lost it.
Yeah, level of movement is what I was going to say, just because it is they have a higher threshold for a lot more sensory elements going on.
Energy levels is a really good differentiator between extroverts and introverts. It applies for all extroverts and all introverts, with the exception of people who have chronic illness or certain illnesses that naturally make their energy levels low. So I've met extroverts who identify with being low energy because they're going through depression or something that lowers their energy. But with all things considered, if someone is in a healthy state, I hear the same thing over and over again, which is the extroverted counterpart always has more energy than the introverted counterpart on a whole.
ESFJs seem to be able to, like, they are willing to push people into doing things much more readily than I've seen ISFJs. Like, we don't actually want to force someone to do something they don't want to do. But if an ESFJ thinks it's right for FE, that everyone's involved in something, they're going to try to push people to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say is what comes to mind is a stronger social calendar. They put themselves out there sociably.
They tend to have, from what I've observed, just a higher level of that duty and responsibility that SFJs tend to have. So they tend to pile on more and not have that sense of boundaries of when to say enough. So I think that they can be more prone to burnout than ISFJs. We know when we've hit our limits and when we need to step back and be more reclusive and take breaks. And I don't think that they have that radar.
Yeah. And Roger?
So my girlfriend's actually an ESFJ, so I have been able to notice a lot of interesting kind of differences. And yeah, definitely the number one thing that I noticed for sure has been that energy differential. Like she would love to go out exploring, go out adventuring, go out to travel. I'm much more comfortable being at home. On another aspect too, when it comes to SI, for us ISFJ, it's all very automatic. But for her, it seems that she has a little bit more control over what she wants to use her SI on. For us, we use it automatically. We don't really think about it. But in her case, she's able to kind of have better control over it. She decides what she wants to recall. She decides what kind of concrete experience that she had in her past and apply it to whatever that she may want. And the only other thing too that I've noticed would be with feeling for sure. I definitely could see like a little bit more emotion based, even when it comes to decision making or with anything that goes on as well. It's always imbued with emotion versus with me, it's just all been more about, has this worked before? Is this something that has been done before? What do other people think about it? It's a lot more past based. For her, it's much more feeling based for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. So it seems like ESFJs are quicker to action. So they're more likely to jump in. They're more likely to host get-togethers. Bringing people together is a very ESFJ thing. But it's also an ISFJ thing too. But an ESFJ will have it more, perhaps, like way more. I don't know, in frequency if you were to plot it on a graph.
Mm-hmm.
ESFJs are also more likely to ask other people for their perceptions all the time, I think. So it's kind of like, let's say they're hosting a wedding. They might go like, how does Patricia feel about my dress? How does Sally feel about my dress? How does Glennon view my dress? And does she like it? Is it a good dress? Is it a bad dress? Is it a valuable dress? Sorry, that's a really simplistic example, and it probably reduces down the complexity of it. But the idea that I'm trying to convey is that an ESFJ, because they have aspirational TI, they're more likely to not trust their TI and more likely to outsource it to other people and to go like, what do you think? What is your TI? How about your TI and your TI? And then kind of like take everyone's TI and then fuse it together instead of generating their own TI. Whereas I think an ISFJ might sometimes ask people for their opinion, but not as frequently as an ESFJ would, because there's more of a SITI going in your own inner world and trying to figure out for yourself before trying to externalize it and figure out what other people feel or their preferences are about a thing.
I'm thinking about all the opinion polls I would put on Twitter now. For fun. I'd always have an opinion first, but I kind of want to see, like, let's pull the public and see what they think too. You know, see where I rank in this kind of thing.
I agree. And on that note, Joyce, I do tend to think ESFJs tend to be better dressers. I think I can say that because as an ISFJ, I know I'm not like the best fashionable dresser.
I actually feel like, yeah, ESFJs I know are usually more conscious of that for some reason. Maybe it is a greater awareness of FE, what comes off best.
Yeah.
Generally.
What appeals to other people in general.
Yeah. If I were to make a broad sweeping generalization, extroverts on a whole sometimes are generally more likely to put more into their appearance. That's generalization, so it doesn't apply for everyone. Especially like intuitive types might not care because they're like in their head. But on a whole, extroverts are aware of how the external world looks, like they're tuned into the external world. So a byproduct of being externally focused is knowing how you look to other people. So extroverts tend to dress in a way that shows that they actually have an external awareness to the environment around them. Whereas the introverts, even if they're sensors, they might be more tuned into their inner world. And so that might cause a disconnect and a less caring of how their presentation looks to other people.
I think about comfort level, not just physically, like how does this feel against my skin, but can I see myself walking around for hours around other people looking like this? Like, would I feel comfortable like that whenever I'm thinking about clothing?
Yeah, I agree.
Yay, yeah.
Yeah, it's same for me.
Yeah.
Because I want to avoid negativity.
Right.
You just want to find a way to reference your shirt. So
Right.
I think for us too, as introverts, we tend to downplay fashion because for me, I don't like being the center of attention. I don't like any sort of awkward vibes coming towards me. And the way I dress, I think usually is going to either deter that or attract that more.
Yeah, it makes you more self-conscious, I think. When you try to look a certain way, it's like, oh, I don't know. Like when you're trying to appeal.
But I always admire it about extroverts for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. What's the difference between NE in the 3rd slot versus NE in the 4th slot?
From the ISFJs that I know, it seems like they're coming up with new projects all the time or new things to do all the time. A greater willingness to interact with something new too, which I kind of wonder if that's just more extroversion, but the NE kind of leads to the newness. And I think we can catastrophize things a lot easier than them.
I think for us, when we're under stress, that can happen. We can catastrophize, if that's pronouncing it correctly. Catastrophize the situation because we're under heavy stress or we have unrealistic expectations of the world.
I think that they're probably more readily creative, expressing creativity, especially since being an extrovert, they want to be closely connected with the outside world more than introverts probably. So they don't find it as handicapping to be emotionally or creatively expressive. I tend to think of myself as very creative, but maybe not as expressive with it. Like things that I do creatively are more just for me or for people that I'm intimately close with, and I don't share them with a lot of people. So I think that's one thing I admire about the ISFJs, being more ready to share those things with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm very similar to Jordan. I paint acrylic paintings, and I've been doing it for about 5 years now, but I've only just started to actually sharing that on the internet. And it took me a long time to get there, to have that confidence and willingness to kind of reach out and do that.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And so with ESFJs, another way to tell apart an introvert from an extrovert is, what are their thoughts primarily about? Extroverts, in a broad sweeping way, tend to think about the external world. So even when they're inside their own mind, thinking their own thoughts, it's actually about other people or external things, or it's about things outside of themselves, even if they're not conscious of it. So extroverts in general, like their dialogue is actually not always related to themselves. It's like way more about the world. It's about like the external world. Whereas for introverts, when you listen to an introvert's internal dialogue within their own head, it's actually more introspective and it's more about their own type of dialogue apart from the world, almost, if that makes sense. If you know an ISFJ, they're going to be more in their SITI, and you're going to hear more of that, or you're going to see more of that. And with an ESFJ, they're more likely to loop with their FE and NE, so you'll see more of that. So it's like, what's more prominent? What seems like their more comfortable worlds? Is it SITI or FE-NE? And that's something you can use to differentiate it. And it's apparent in inner dialogue too. With some ESFJs, they've told me that they don't like being in their mind for too long. It's almost like they kind of want to be more externally focused. It doesn't feel comfortable always being in their own mind. But that doesn't apply for all of them. That applies for some of them. But that's an inkling that you might be an ESFJ or an extrovert if you have trouble sticking with your own dialogue. Introverts on a whole are a little more comfortable with their inner dialogue, just sticking with it, than some extroverts. Some extroverts can be really comfortable with it too. So I'm not trying to create a label. I'm just trying to like give you clues that help. Those are some wide sweeping generalizations that are true some of the time. And so any last ideas before we close off the panel?
One other thing I think about like FE DOMs in general, what I hear is they don't like being alone. And I personally have never felt that way. Like I actually really value my time alone and learn a lot. So that might be a helpful differentiator too, because if FE is your dominant function, then the information you're most going to be paying attention to is like what you're witnessing from other people mainly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're an FE Dom, everything's going to be related to FE. So your thoughts are actually all going to be FE oriented. With FE, you just realize that everything connects back to FE if they're an FE Dom. Whereas for an ISFJ, their thoughts don't always have to be about FE. So they're actually sometimes about other things as well.
It feels more about trying to come up with a reasoning as to why different points in time interact with each other and how it applies to who we are. At least that's what it feels like for me.
Yeah, more introspective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've said it before. I think it's a lot about synchronicity and bringing everything back to an overall harmony and connectivity of all the information.
Yeah.
And so thank you everyone for coming out and being so wonderful, being FE balls of sunshine, warmth, and compliments. My words of affirmation buddies, and that we can tell each other warm fuzzies, and you guys don't reject it like some of the thinkers on my panels do.
No. Oh, we like all the love.
Thanks for allowing the piling of love and participating in the piling of love. It's always
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. It's always a pure delight to be surrounded by FE because you feel like you're being hugged through their vibe. It's like your presence is a hug, or your words are like a hug, and I feel it in my soul. Because I don't have a body, so I feel it in my soul.
It pierces you straight through our nurturing.
Yeah, the nurture is just so wholesome. A great word for ISFJs is wholesome. It's just great. And Jordan, you have such a soothing melodic voice, like it's unreal. It's very, very very loving. It feels like you could be my mom in another life. It's kind of like a voice that is telling you like everything's gonna be okay, you'll be fine, you are enough, like you're great. Like it's a very soothing voice is what I mean.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's like if there was a voice therapy and you could give therapy through just having a nice voice and having people talk to you, Jordan would be great for that, because your voice makes people feel loved like instantly. Just like there's instant coffee where if you pour water it turns into coffee, Jordan's voice is like instant love. It feels like you just feel loved off the bat.
Jordan needs to do some ASMR.
I've thought about it. So
yeah,
in the tank here.
Joyce would be your #1 subscriber.
I would be. Yeah. Yay. And Jami, this
is a compliment roundtable. Joyce, you are beautiful and kind and so loving and very smart and compassionate and a constantly beautiful force in this realm. Okay, now you can tell me what you wanted to say, because you have to hear that too.
I can't top that.
Oh.
And it's all true.
Oh.
It is.
Oh, Jami, you're a cupcake. You know why? Because you're sweet and filled with frosting, as in like your sugary goodness is equivalent to the most diabetes-inducing cupcake.
Yes. I'll be yummy. Sounds good.
Yeah, so thanks for that sweet treat in everyone's life. It's like Halloween for everyone because they get trick or treat, but they get like a sweet treat. So it always treats with Jami.
The ISFJ cupcake monster is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I like it.
Thank you. Lovely. Yeah. And Roger, you tend to like to wait to say your opinion last because you're an Enneagram 9 and you like to like be very polite and accommodating and let others go first to kind of show them politeness. And it's such an, I don't know, an Enneagram 9 ISFJ thing to do. It also shows that you're more on the introspective side because you'll wait and you'll wait and you'll let it stew in your head, the question. And when you talk, it's actually very profound because you wait. So when we were waiting for that ESFJ versus ISFJ question, Roger, you hit us with gold nugget after gold nugget after gold nugget because you take your time to think about what you're going to say before you say it. And that's what makes you the wise guru of the group. Roger is also one of the admin or moderators of ISFJ Heaven on Facebook. So he's a part of that Facebook group. So he knows what's up.
Very good at moderating, I might say.
Wow. You're appreciated, Roger. And Rob. It's really nice to see how eager you are to participate in panels. You do a little like happy dance, I swear, when you get to participate. Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's always nice to know someone's enthusiastic to be a part of the community or to be a part of the chat. It makes me feel loved. I'm like, someone wants to be on these panels. It makes me so happy. So you pass on the joy. Yeah, it's really great, Rob, to hear that you resonate with behind the scenes interaction style that Linda Barron's made, which is the ISFJ interaction style, which helps some people figure out, are you an ISFJ or INFJ? Because INFJs are chart the course. And that might be a good differentiator that I'll link below. I'll link my video with Linda Barron's down below if anyone wants to figure out what those terms mean in more detail.
Thank you, Joyce. Really appreciated. And as always, I'm always eager to watch your videos. I as soon as I see they're released, that notification comes on, and I want to see those videos when they're available. So that's an important point for folks to like and subscribe and click on that notification button so they can instantly hear what's out there.
Yay! Thank you for helping with promotion. You know what's very wholesome about you, Rob, is that you raise your hand before you speak. I guess like maybe with some introverts, they're kind of like, okay, I gotta have some permission before I open my mouth. I'm gonna just raise my hand. Whereas like extroverts are kind of like, blah.
Yeah. And as you notice, we're probably the most polite panel you've had.
Really, like very polite. Yeah. Y'all nod to each other, like lots of nodding. It's like, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. It's amazing. It's like an affirmation circle.
It is.
Defending everyone's self-confidence and defending a sense of emotional wellness and well-being with everyone through your gestures. Yeah. And so thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.